The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Our return guest today is Mary Terhune, who described on last week's show some of the amazing revelations she's received from the other side. A number of years later, during a health challenge, Mary had an experience of nature's healing law of like cures like, after being introduced to the consciousness-based system of homeopathic medicine. Mary learned how to resolve areas in her consciousness that held the root of disease brought on by traumatic events in her early years. So in this period of pandemic, I'd like Mary to discuss what the homeopathic approach would be to dealing with the threat of COVID-19. Mary, welcome back to NDE Radio.
Nice to be back with you, Lee. Thank you for having me again.
Well, thank you for being here, and especially the topic today. Tell us a little about how you got into homeopathy and how you relate it to this bigger picture that we're dealing with in the world.
Yeah, well, of course, I was trained as an RN and worked in that field for many years. And then eventually I found my way into natural healing, that began actually with massage school. So I went to massage school for 3 years. And then I found out about Reiki, and I became a Reiki master. And then, of course, I had these spiritual awakenings that we spoke about the last time. This is all in my book, of course, Out of the Blue,
yes,
which people can get from my website and from Amazon. And in 1998, I was having a health issue, an actual health crisis, and my thyroid was failing. I was suffering from what's known as Hashimoto's thyroid, where it's an autoimmune disease, and at that point, I went to see an endocrinologist who put me on Synthroid, and it made me so ill that I knew I had to find another way. And that at this point, I knew that disease really began in emotions and traumas in one's life, and then filtered down and showed up in the body. And I really wanted to understand, why was I having this? What was the emotional reasons behind it? And more than that, please send me a practitioner of someone who could heal this so that I could understand it. And actually said a strong prayer for this. And the very next day I went to work and I mentioned this to a colleague of mine, and she turned around with a pamphlet in her hand and said, "Oh, well, then you're going to need homeopathy." And I'm like, I said, "Homeopathy?" And she says, "Yes." So I look at the pamphlet and it says, "The Gentle Mind-Body Medicine, Homeopathy." And it was a pamphlet written by a nurse who was also a homeopath. And I thought, this is the answer. I know this is the answer. And so I immediately went over to the phone and called her up and set up an appointment. And before the appointment, she said, "I'd like you to fill out a timeline of the never well since events in your life, starting with in utero, when your mother was pregnant with you." And I thought, well, this is a very interesting system of medicine. I've never been asked to do this before. And so never well since events are anything like, oh, well, I was never well since my dog died and my reaction to my dog dying, or I was never well since when I was young I had to move and change schools, or I was never well since that vaccine, or I was never well since I fell and hit my shoulder, or whatever it was. Whatever the never well since, and then later in life, I was never well since that breakup, or I was never well since my divorce. So these never well since events have impacts on your energy and are stored there unless they're resolved. And so when I asked my mother, what did anything happen while you were pregnant with me? She said, "Oh yeah, when I was 8 months pregnant with you, my mother died." And my mother and I were best friends. And so she said it was extremely traumatic for me. So she lost her mother. And so I was imprinted as an infant with this grief or with this loss. And so then when I looked at the timeline in my life, throughout my life, I saw that I had all these grief events surrounding relationships, losses. And I thought, wow, this is powerful. So I went back and had the full interview with the homeopath. And she gave me a remedy. And she said, now go home, take this remedy. It was in a water bottle. She goes, just take 1 teaspoon of it in your mouth, just 1. I go, okay, fine. So I'm standing at the kitchen sink and I take 1 teaspoon of this, and all of a sudden my whole consciousness leaves my body and I go out into this void. And all of a sudden I see this twinkling like a little star twinkling. And it was moving this way. And I thought, oh, that's the energy that's stuck, that grief. There it is. It's right there. And then all of a sudden, I see another twinkling star that matches this star. And I realized that's the remedy. That's the remedy coming. And when they both hit, it exploded. Like cures like. I was downloaded with a complete understanding of how homeopathy worked as consciousness. That wherever you're stuck in your consciousness, it's an energy. And you need a similar energy like that from nature through the innate law that's within our being of like cures like, that your state is matching the state of the remedy. And when these two hit, things explode. And it like cures like. That's the beginning of your healing. And then immediately I came back into my body and I understood the significance of this. Of course, I had my training as a registered nurse. And so I immediately understood the difference between how we treat things that way in the Western model and this homeopathic model. And I called up the homeopath and I said, I have to study this. I just had this experience. I understand how it works. And she goes, well, you're very fortunate because in 3 months, one of the best homeopaths, a doctor, Dr. Luc de Schepper, is going to come to Boston and he's going to teach for 3 years. You want to study with him? Yes. And so that was the beginning of this remarkable, remarkable journey and a complete paradigm shift in approaching how one deals with symptoms that you have. And of course, at this time now, of course, that homeopathy, I would come to know, was once practiced. Homeopathic medicine was once practiced in the United States that began in 1825, and it was gaining so much popularity into 1900s that conventional medicine was quite worried about its competition, and it wasn't happy with it. But it was on a roll, and it was becoming very popular, especially because it was so efficacious in all epidemics, including the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, where 500, however, 100 million people or more died. And at any rate, I would come to understand that this history, that the reason that homeopathic medicine was removed from our medical schools, where it was once taught, we had it in over 250 hospitals, doctors' offices. It was becoming extremely popular. And the reason that it was removed is because the Rockefeller Sr., who loved homeopathy and used it, and he had homeopaths treating his family, that he owned Standard Oil. And he was a baron. I mean, he had millions and millions of dollars, and he was very interested in forming his own medical institute. But his son, Rockefeller Jr., was against homeopathy, as it turns out. And his cohorts were against homeopathy, too, because they were on the side of just traditional conventional medicine. Not that you can't have both. I believe you can have both, but you have to keep both, too. So what happened was Rockefeller Sr., he was interested in giving money to homeopathy and funding it in equal amounts, but but he didn't want to have to deal with it. He didn't want to have to do it himself, so he gave the money to his son, and his son did not fund homeopathy. Instead, they created a panel, it issued a Flexner report saying that because they couldn't understand how homeopathy works, they were going to remove it from the medical system. And they made certain of it because if you were a medical doctor and you tried to practice it, they would take your license away. And if you continued, they would throw you in jail. So that's how homeopathy was removed from our medical system. Now, at that time, of course, Rockefeller, of course, owning Standard Oil, what they did was they looked at the structure of these plants that homeopathy, that's how homeopathy is based on getting remedies from plants and minerals. So the chemist who in the Standard Oil in the petrochemical field looked at the structure of these plants and then created synthetic structures made from petrochemicals, and they could patent them and make tons of money. And in homeopathic remedies, you can't patent them, you can't make tons of money, but what you can do is you can heal the people.
Yes.
Yeah. So homeopathy works on the law of like cures like, and it's a living medicine. And conventional medicine, synthetic drugs, they're not living drugs. Therefore, because they're on a material level, they're made on a material level, they act by the law of suppression, which creates chronic disease because you're never really healing anything. You're just pressing it deeper to get rid of some symptoms, but then you end up with others. So, and of course, I just want to say up front, we need our trauma medicine. We need trauma medicine. We have to have both. But we need to, because you can see all hospitals are built mainly on trauma medicine, and we need them. And we can't be flooding them with people who've got colds and flus and symptoms like this, serious symptoms that get into trouble. We need to have our preventive medicine back. And that's what homeopathy provides. It's the remedies are not on a material level, they're on a dynamic level. And they work with the consciousness, they're consciousness-based. So this very, it's a different model that works with a different law. And we need really to restore that back into our system so that our trauma centers can be there for our traumas and needed surgeries and accidents and things like that and serious things. And we need to have our preventative medicine so that they can work side by side with each other. And I do believe, as I mentioned in the last interview I did with you, we are evolving now. Humanity is evolving from an egoic material structure connection to our divine nature or dynamic spiritual nature. And we're realizing that consciousness doesn't live in the body. Consciousness lives outside the body and informs the cells of the body. And in fact, there's a physicist at MIT, I think Max Tegmark is his name, who wrote an article called "Consciousness as another state of matter." So they're recognizing, they're studying now consciousness to try to figure out what is that consciousness anyway. Well, science and spirituality are coming together here, and we're realizing that they're not separate; they're one and the same.
I hope that happens soon.
Yes, and so we are, as an evolving humanity, it's natural that homeopathy will be brought back because we're going to see now why we need it, and we're coming into remembering that we have a dynamic nature called divinity or consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Even if you're an agnostic, you can know that's you can believe that there is a dynamis, whether you want to call it God or not.
Yes.
But that nature is our nature, and that informs all the cells and informs the body, giving it this appearance of life. So at this time, as I mentioned, homeopathy has been efficacious and became popular in all the epidemics, including cholera, smallpox, polio, all of these epidemics in the Spanish flu and all the flus. In the Spanish flu, the conventional medicine lost 28% of their population. The homeopaths lost less than 1%.
Have they taken a position on COVID-19? And what sort of like?
It's interesting.
What sort of like would go with the like of COVID-19?
Right. So a homeopath doesn't look at the virus or the germ. A homeopath looks at your reaction, you as a person, your reaction to this energy of the virus. And so it's looking at your inner terrain. So some people have symptoms, some people don't have symptoms. Why? Because your inner terrain is different. That's why. And so we look at the symptom picture. We don't look at killing a virus or killing a bacteria at all. Homeopathic medicine is not designed for that. Homeopathic medicine looks at your symptom picture, your mental, physical, emotional state. And in these, flu-like symptoms, you don't feel just sick inside your body. Your mind feels sick, and you have chills, and you feel achy all over. And so there are certain remedies that match that, and when you give it, things are resolved on the dynamic level, and then your immune system is strong, and you no longer are susceptible to these viruses and bacteria that are around all the time. And so, yes, there are certain remedies. There's a sort of like a handful of remedies that they're looking at. And when you have these large, pandemics or epidemics, you're looking for what's known as the genus epidemicus, a particular remedy or maybe a couple of remedies that are effective to match the symptom picture that people are actually experiencing. Like, for example, the remedy gelsemium has the symptom picture of feeling run over by a truck, and your eyes, you can't keep yourself upright. You have to lay down. Your legs are weak. You ache all over. You're so exhausted. You feel like you're hit like a truck. You have chills that run up and down your spine, and you have a fever and maybe a headache. And that's a gelsemium reaction that you are having to this disharmony of this particular virus. So homeopathy doesn't look at killing the virus or killing. It doesn't look at it that way. It's not a germ theory of disease. It's a dynamic theory. It's a whole different paradigm. And as I mentioned, we're moving out of the material paradigm of medicine in that way, and we're looking at this energetic paradigm or consciousness-based system. And so it's a very different system. So you can see from the beginning, there was always this struggle between conventional and homeopathic medicine. And of course, conventional medicine, basically they're raised to tell you that there's nothing in these homeopathic remedies. How can they work? Well, it's the dynamic level that we're talking about. And but we do need to have both systems. I'm not saying you throw out one. I'm saying add this in, add this back.
It sounds to me like you're saying that the physical immune system that we have also has a psychological and a spiritual aspect to it that hasn't been served by Western medicine.
Yes. And in fact, so when the homeopathic remedies, when you take them, you're restored mentally, emotionally, and physically. It touches the whole being because you're treating the person that has these symptoms, that's speaking to a disharmony, that is not able to deal with this imbalance. So it's a whole different modality. It's a different language.
Yes. Now, when you have an epidemic like the Spanish flu of 1918 or COVID-19 today, it sounds like lots and lots and lots of people are suffering from the same condition.
Yes.
So there should be a treatment for all of us. And I'm not talking about a vaccine. I'm talking about a spiritual, psychological restoration.
So there's a handful of remedies. In the time of the Spanish pandemic flu, it was mainly bryonia and gelsemium. Bryonia dealt with the dry cough and prevention of pneumonia, and gelsemium dealt with the chills and fevers and aches and pains. So those were the two biggest ones that were used. Now, you'll recognize that these symptoms that people have are very common symptoms of flu-like things. Dry coughs, pneumonia, if it goes that way. Chills, exhaustion, fever. And there's another remedy called Upatorium perfoliatum, which is an extreme reaction to these flu-like symptoms where your temperature can go way high, 104 or so, and you can have rigors where you're just shaking. Everything is shaking all over. That's different than a gelsemium reaction to the flu, right? To the virus. This is a shaking, and this is aches and pains like you feel like your bones are breaking. And so some people have that reaction. But there's usually like a handful of remedies that will satisfy any type of pandemic or epidemic that are common experiences that people have. So there's about 5 different remedies that will cover, depending upon where you live, the temperature where you live, the conditions of where you live, different parts of the country. So one part of the country, maybe the East Coast, it's mainly gelsemium. And maybe another part, it's mainly something else. Or maybe it's both remedies, Bryonia and gelsemium. So it depends upon, but they're common remedies that will usually handle most of the entire population. Arsenicum is another one, is another common flu and cold prevention remedy. So, when I started out in homeopathy, I used to get colds like every 6 months, and I have to take antibiotics to deal with bronchitis. When I started being treated homeopathically, I never had that happen again. I never had bronchitis again, and I never needed antibiotics again. Because It clears out and it restores. Not only is it's not just a one-time thing it's clearing out your propensity or your miasmatic inherited load. So it clears out all of that to free up your immune system for good, that it can work for good. And that, when the flu comes around, you may not get it as bad because you can take your remedy beforehand. So it acts as prevention and treatment of it to clear out that propensity or that weakness in you, these inherited traits that all of humanity has. So it's quite a very significant system of medicine that's very different paradigm. And we're coming out of the old paradigms. You can see we're changing our paradigms of our financial paradigms. We're realizing, wait a minute, people need to have an income that's guaranteed. And we're looking at our educational system. We're going to be remodeling that system. We're going to be remodeling our food system, restructuring all of that. Our social system, the way we think about each other, the way we approach each other, not as from a duality, but a sense that there's enough for everybody. There's enough food, there's enough clothing, there's enough of everything. And it just, how are we living as a humanity? And what's our relationship with nature? How are we treating Mother Nature? We have 53 traces of pharmaceuticals in our water supply. How are we treating our water supply? What about these fossil fuels? Dumping it into our water supply. We're poisoning ourselves, and we realize this earth we cannot survive on this earth the way we're going. And of course, this is a time of a tremendous evolutionary change in humanity, moving from egoic structure into their spiritual structure, and will create from abundance and lack and no fear. It's going to be created out of love versus the fear of the egoic structure. So we're in this huge change. And of course, as I mentioned, the astrologers are talking about these tremendous changes happening, these powerful planetary changes in where we're moving out of the more dense earth type of fossil fuels and drugs and more into Aquarius now. It's a much lighter energy, and it's dynamic, and it's consciousness based, and it's not material based, and it's a different paradigm. The old paradigms are going to want to hang on. They're going to want to attack the new paradigms and say, no, that's not the way it is. No, you're wrong. Of course, there's this pull, and how much we can evolve quickly as humanity will govern how much we will suffer, essentially. So we're going through this has never happened on Earth before. And the knowledge that I was given, that here is your divinity, the divinity that awaits all mankind, we're moving into becoming what's known as Jivan Muktas. Jivan is a body and Mukta is liberation. So liberation from the physical body into knowing and experience our divine nature as divine, and that everyone is divine, and that we will create out of that love, out of knowing there is tremendous abundance and out of joy. But in the meantime, we're being challenged like never before, and Mother Nature has given us her wake-up call, and under no circumstances or we'll be going back to the old ways. We just won't.
And you see COVID-19 as playing a role in that?
Yes. I mean, Mother Nature is talking to us, saying, and not only that, but, as I mentioned, we're part of Mother Nature. We are in nature, and this law of like here's like is in our being. And so we are sort of saying we can't live this way. We have to do something different. So this change is coming from inside us. It's not happening to us. It's happening from us, whether we're aware of it or not. We've been preparing for this over the past 15 years, as I mentioned, through learning how to meditate, go inside and contemplate, learning yoga, learning that everyone is equal. Eckhart Tolle's wonderful book, A New Earth, where he spoke about a new earth and a new being that we're giving birth to inside ourselves. He speaks of that so beautifully. And of course, he goes around the world talking about presence. And this is what he's talking about, is this divine dynamic presence that's living in the moment of the now, which is eternity. That's our eternal nature. So the now is a state of being, not a time, it's a state of being. It's beyond time, and it's beyond fear. Then it comes into love, yeah.
So you would recommend probably that people who are stuck at home, probably bored and watching too much television, should take some time and meditate. And
yeah,
I mean, this might be a great opportunity rather than an imprisonment.
Yes, I call it a retreat.
That's a good way to put it.
Or, as some would say, a great time to imbibe the grace that's there for us. And, you can just meditate on your breath. Just close your eyes and watch the breath go in and out, and meditate on the space between the breaths. That space is the now. That space is our divine essence. And that's what happened to me when I awakened the first time. It's like my mind stopped. I could no longer think one bad thought. And in that moment, that space of divinity opened. And that's when I had the visitation from, of course, the Master Jesus. And then it unfolded in that when I met a monk as well. So,
yes, you said it was, I think, the space between thoughts that is important.
The space between thoughts is the same space between breaths. It is the space of the now. It doesn't contain the past where you're worried or the future where you're worried. It's the space of the now. And in the now, everything is in divine order. And there's love in that now. It's beyond the anxiety state. And so the more we delve deep into this in ourselves, the more we can connect with it. It's in us. It's already in us. We just have to remember who we are. And this is the great awakening now. And the Hopis talk about it. The Cherokees talk about it. The Cherokee Nation talks about it. The Peruvian shamans are talking about this time. It's the great turning of humanity. It's the great awakening of humanity. And they call it the rainbow people, the rainbow, the chakras awakening and discovering this corona of light around our head called divinity. It's interesting that this virus has, when they look at it, the structure, it has this corona of light around it. And so that's very interesting.
Yes, I've thought that myself.
Yes.
Everyone else relates it to the brand of beer called Corona.
Yes.
But I think that light around your head is really an interesting name for a disease.
Yes.
Mary, we are just about out of time, and I want to, again, leave you time to talk about your website and your book.
Yes, my website is maryterhune.com. So it's Mary and then TERHUNE.com. My book is Out of the Blue. It's published by Hay House. It's also on Amazon. And Wayne Dyer wrote a little note on the back that said that I wrote the best description of self-realization he's ever read in 30 years. And he's also, audio of him reading from the section on self-realization is on my website. It's a very special thing that he left for us. It was very moving to hear his voice. And,
it is. It's wonderful. And I would tell every listener they should go to your website and look for that. It's right at the beginning of the website. It's right at the top.
And Raymond Moody wrote the foreword. Raymond Moody, of course, we all know him.
Oh, yes.
Life After Life wrote it. Famous Raymond Moody. He wrote a beautiful foreword for me. I met him. We became friends. And yeah. So.
Yes. A couple summers ago, he came up to a camp in Maine, a spiritualist camp, and lectured there for a week. And I was over there visiting him quite a lot. He's a great guy.
He's a sweet man.
He is. Well, Mary, thank you so much. I'm sorry we are out of time. We could go on like this all afternoon, but I'm so glad you could come back to be on the second week show. And for those listeners who did not catch last week's show, be sure to go back into our past shows and look for your discussion of all the enlightenment, the experiences that you had from 1984 on. Let me remind also the listeners, I dubbed you all telephone chaplains out there a couple weeks ago. Don't forget to keep using your phone or social media and check out those folks who you think might benefit from having someone to talk to. Give them a call. And if they'd like to learn more about NDEs, if that comes up in your conversation, recommend our new IANDS NDE radio app to them. They can just go to the App Store or Google Play to download, and they're free. And thanks to Ken Root, who did a wonderful job designing them. Please stay home, stay well, and until next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, this is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.